So you've probably heard me talk about masterminds before. If you listen to the show, I kind of talk about it a lot. But what I realized is that I should not be the one doing all the talking. The people in the mastermind group should tell you about what they got out of it. So stay tuned, because just after this, you're going to hear from Andy Contaguglia from the Contaguglia Law Firm out in Denver, Colorado. Check him out. He's absolutely amazing. And this is what he had to say about the mastermind. The other thing is, if you do want to join, go to eventualmillionaire.com/app, APP, to fill out an application today.
If you want an opportunity to meet with somebody who is going to really help you scale your business, Jaime is perfect for that. And what I really like about her is, again, I keep coming back to this network of people, which has just been invaluable. A lot of people reach out to her because of her, her one of her many claim to fames with, being John Lee Dumas's coach when he was building up his podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire. And that was really an impetus to me. It was like, I want to meet this person. And then being able to meet her and then being able to sort of grow it. I mean, every time I meet with her, every time I talk with her, I meet new people and my circle of influence grows. And the people I meet, I influence and they influence. And you just sort of, it's like the blob that just keeps growing, but it's great.
Potent advice and inspiration from real self-made millionaires. Welcome to The Eventual Millionaire with your host, Jaime Masters.
Welcome to Eventual Millionaire. I am Jaime Masters, and today on the show, we have my good friend, Grant Baldwin. You can check him out at grantbaldwin.com. You can also check out thespeakerlab.com. He's an amazing, nationally known speaker, and he was a former client of mine, and he's amazing. He just came out with a new book called The Successful Speaker. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Jaime, it is such an honor to be here, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Heck yeah. So congratulations on your book launch that just came out. Make sure everybody check that out. And you have a podcast, which is why we started to get to know each other. You came,
the book?
Yeah. You came online in 2014, which is not that long ago. And you've had, I'm allowed to say, a huge successful uptick in being known by all of my friends and everybody in the space. So how did you do it?
Well, it's you. It's all through you. And so for the backstory here, and I don't know how much you want to dig into, but I was a full-time speaker for several years. And part of the challenge with being a speaker is that I remember a friend telling me it's a high-paying manual labor job, and that we'd get paid really, really well to stand on stage and talk. But the nature of speaking is you had to be there. You had to show up for it. So you had to get on a plane. You had to leave your family. And so at the time I was doing like 60, 70 gigs a year, which was fun. I really, really enjoyed it. But I was like, is this it? Like, is this what the business looks like for the rest of my life? And there's plenty of speakers who have been speaking full time for their entire careers. They want to do 50, 60, 70, 100 gigs a year for the next 20, 30, 50 years of their life. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I was just kind of like, I don't know. It's like, it's not, I really felt like I had a job more than a business. And so I was trying to think through like, okay, if I was going to do something different, what would that look like? And so at the time started seeing more with online courses and with podcasts and that sort of thing. And somehow came across your stuff and was first really intrigued on doing a podcast. I know you were doing a lot of coaching around podcasting, and I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out. And I still vividly remember, at the time we lived in Missouri, we live in Nashville now, which you were somewhat behind the scenes helpful with, and we can get into that if you want. But I remember the call that we had, and you quoted me a price which was astronomical at the time for me, and I was just like, "There's no way I can do this! Oh my gosh!" But I was like, "I got to do this," and so jumped in for the next several months. You helped me put together a podcast, which went really well. So at this point, I mean, at the time of this recording, I've done 450 some podcast episodes, and you were incredibly instrumental in that. So. Yeah, you helped me really kind of think through ultimately, making some of those transitions and where I was going and what were, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? And so, follow the Jaime Masters strategies, and here we are.
No testimony needed. Thank you so much, Grant. But I know I was only just a piece of what you've created, because even at the beginning, I know you want to be home with you have 3 girls, you have an amazing family, you're one of those dads that wants to be around a lot more, and to see your drive. Really impressive. But, and this is where the story I think is interesting, we started out with a whole different brand for you, and you totally pivoted. So tell me a little bit about what that is, because everybody thinks that everybody gets it out of the gate, and that's typically not what happens at all, and no one really talks about that backstory.
Yeah. So at the time when I was doing a lot of speaking, I did a lot of speaking in the education space. I did a lot with high school students and colleges, and I was doing a lot of speaking around the topic of careers, helping students think through what do they want to do with their life? What do they want to be when they grow up? And I know a lot of, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 year olds are thinking about that same thing. What do I want to do with my life? Because far too many people will get into something just because maybe it's the path of least resistance, or my parents wanted me to do this, or, I had an opportunity there, so I did it, and I'm still here, decades later. And so really thinking through like, okay, we all got to work, we all got to make a living, we all got to do something. What do I really want to be doing? What am I excited about? What am I passionate about? What am I interested in? And so I was doing a lot of speaking around that. And at the time, as a full-time speaker, one of the things I noticed is I would have a lot of people who would come up to me after I'd speak and say, that's really cool, you're a speaker. How did you get into that? And they would always ask that phrase, how did you get into that? And for the longest time, I thought that would make a really interesting podcast. And so that's kind of the idea I think I came to you with, or we kind of worked out. I was like, wouldn't it be interesting just to interview people who had just unique, interesting careers, and just to hear how they got into it? And so that ended up kind of becoming the podcast. And so we did about 140 some episodes of that over a couple of years. And we're interviewing people. We interviewed a guy who was a Lego master builder. He's one of the world's top Lego builders, and a guy who worked for Nike, who worked with Michael Jordan to design some of the Air Jordans, and a lady who is a cheesemonger and like a professional, literally cheese expert, a guy who was a mascot for an NBA team. So some of these things where you're just like, how did you get into that? Like, that's just fascinating. So in two ways. One is there may be people who are listening, they're like, okay, this sounds weird, but I would love to be an NBA mascot. Like, what's the path to that? Like, how do you go about doing that? So hearing their stories, but then two, hopefully being an inspiration for people who are going, okay, if that person can be a cheesemonger, if that person can be, a Lego master builder, if that person can be fill in the blank, like, surely I can figure out my thing, what it is that I want to do. And so the podcast was really kind of in some ways like the gateway drug of like, let's just try this. Let's kind of build the audience, and then kind of figure it out from there. And so eventually had, a lot of people who naturally were listening were people who were trying to figure out what they wanted to do with their own career and with their own life. And so, so we created a course that at the time we called Clarity Course, just helping people get clear, which I thought was a great name, helping people get clear on what they wanted to do with their life. And so I remember we did this initial launch for it and put all this work into it, and like, okay, here we go. And we do this launch, and it was fine. I don't like, we sold enough that, hindsight, you're like, that was pretty good. But I don't know if like my expectations were just like, this is going to be it. I'm going to do this one launch, and then I'm going to be on Jaime's show, and I'm set for life. Or I don't know what to expect, but it's kind of like this intuition, internal feeling of like, it was okay, but I don't know if this is if I can make this work, or if I'm excited enough about it. So at the time though, I continue to have a lot of people who are asking me, I want to be a speaker. How would I go about doing that? And so a couple years before, I had put together like a small little training for 10 people. It was like a once a month live coaching call type deal. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed teaching speaking and teaching the business of speaking and how do you find and book gigs. And so as soon as we did the Clarity Course launch, this was in December of 2015, 2016, something like that. And I was like, I'm going to quickly pivot to the speaking thing and teaching that. And I remember I had some entrepreneur friends and probably even you are just like, why don't we give it a second here? Let's try this thing that you just did. Let's let that marinate for a second. I was like, no, I think I got something over here. And so put together a different course for speakers, really teaching how to find and book speaking gigs, and had that come out a couple months later, I think in March, and pre-sold it. And then we did some webinars for it, and we started to figure out, automated and live webinars and Facebook ads and yada yada. And that started to really gain some traction. And so that's where I started to feel like, okay, I really feel like we're on to something. And so what ended up happening is for a while, I kind of had a couple different things going, right? Because I was doing a lot of speaking. I was doing a lot of teaching and training around speaking with this course. I was doing webinars on speaking, but then I had like this career podcast that like I really enjoyed, but it just didn't really fit anywhere. And so what we ended up doing was kind of basically wrapping that up after about 145 episodes, and started a new podcast called the Speaker Lab Podcast, which is what we still have today, where again, which fits within what we do now, teaching people how to find and book paid speaking gigs and understand the speaking business. And so, it's certainly, to your point, like it was starting one path, but quickly realizing, I think this is going to be a better fit over there, which, I tell speakers all the time, like it is much simpler to steer a car that's in motion than to steer a car that's in park. Because for so many people, we feel like, I want to start a business, or I want to do something, but I don't know, and I'm not guaranteed success. So I'm going to sit here and wait. I'm going to wait for the stars to align. I'm going to wait until I have the burning bush. I'm going to have the voice from the clouds. And like, that's just not coming. Like, that's not happening. And so I learned a ton from doing the initial podcast and figuring out some of the workflows and figuring out like, how do you get interviews, and how do you connect with these people, and what do you ask them, and how does this work, to then be able to take a lot of those skills from the first podcast, from the first course, from the coaching with you, and then pivot it to what we still do today in our current business. And so those, even if you are pivoting, like, I think that's part of the journey versus feeling like you got to have it all nailed from day one.
You're such a shining example of that. And I just wanted to really go into it because I think people, like you said, are like, I know, but it has to be the right first the right first test. I could do this, or I could do this. And it's hard to pick. People have big time issues with picking. How did you know? Because it also just makes logical sense that you would teach speaking, because that's what you were really, really good at for a really long period of time.
Sure.
And you don't know how to be a mascot. Sorry, I'm assuming. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe you do.
And I cannot do that. No, I have some skills. That is not one of them.
But so it seems like a logical step. Of course, if anyone looked at you, oh, why didn't you pick speaking in the first place? And so tell me a little bit more about the decision. And was it a gut feeling? Was it like oh, I just love this anyway? Tell me a little bit more about breaking that down, because I feel like people get stuck there.
Yeah, so it was definitely because I really enjoyed the career thing for, while I was doing it, because I was, as a speaker, genuinely enjoying what I was doing. And when you and I started working on this initial podcast, how did you get into that? Which is still something. In fact, at the time of this recording this morning, I did another interview for a guy who is the podcast is for high school and college students. So I was like, you need to have them. The show's a couple years old, but go listen to it, because it's I think it's a really good show. And I think, if I remember correctly, you were the first guest on the show, or maybe the first interview. I was probably terrified.
We didn't let John's, when I was the first interview for John Lee Dubas, we didn't let that one go out. Yours was good. You were already a speaker. You were already great. Let me just say that.
So it all worked. It would all worked out in the end. But so I really enjoyed doing the career thing. But the thing that was kind of interesting to me when I was kind of like comparing them, the career path versus like the speaking path, was the career path felt a little vague and squishy. Yes. We're going to help people figure out what they want to do with their life. And they're like, what does that even mean? Like, there's certainly like something there, and something that like everybody wrestles with, more or less. But like the speaking thing, I knew there was a tangible process with an end result. And thankfully, the end result was for most gigs a check. And so if we could show you how there was a direct ROI, because when you're helping someone get clarity, like it's just squishy, and it's just kind of like, that's really good, but it's also really, really hard to quantify,
When your marketing has to be really absolutely amazing, and it seems like there's different avatars because there's different language for each one of the pieces. And that's hard to sort of bulk do, right?
Totally. So if you're 22, you're just graduating college. What do I want to do with my life? Or you're 55 thinking, all right, I'm starting the second half of my career and I'm trying to think through what I want to do. Like, that's just different phases and stages of life, or the 30 something who's been in their same career their entire life and going, I want to do something different, but I'm scared. It's like, those are all real challenges and real fears, but it's hard to like speak to that and to address that in a way that makes sense from like a business model perspective. And so it's also just important from that standpoint to identify, like, a lot of speakers we work with, one of the questions we'll ask them is kind of the long-term goals and aspirations for speaking. Because some of them just say, like, I just like to speak. Speaking's kind of fun. I have a full-time gig. And so if I can speak a few times, if I can share this message, something I'm passionate about, whether I get paid for it, I just want to do some local stuff, that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that, versus also the speaker who says, I want to do this full-time. I want to make a living from this. I've done a little bit of speaking. I want to go all in on this. Both work, but you just have to decide what kind of the goals and the ambitions were. So if I was just like, hey, I just want to help some other people, kind of process this, and there's nothing wrong with it. I just like to do the podcast because it's just a fun outlet and it's a fun little, passion project. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it's going, okay, I want to turn this into a viable business that I can build, then I had to really think through like the financial model of that. And so I just like immediately knew, like, from teaching people to find clarity was important, but financially it was going to be a little bit tough to make work. Whereas I felt with the speaking thing, this is a tangible process that I feel really good about teaching, that I feel really confident in, that this is something that's very confusing to a lot of people, but I know that there's going to be, for people who do it, who follow the process, again, there's kind of a financial result at the end. So it checked a lot of boxes. And I think, something we've kind of alluded to is I think intuition and just kind of that gut feel is really, really undervalued in business. It's just and maybe not just business, but just life. Like I know, my wife, we were high school sweethearts. We've been together for quite a while. You had a chance to meet her on a trip that we were all on for a speaking gig. And so there's times like I remember early on where, a wife would have a feeling. I don't know. I can't explain. I just have this feeling like, what does that mean? Like your feeling doesn't fit into my spreadsheet, but just quickly learning like, okay, sometimes when you have that feeling, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's hard to articulate. It may not make sense. So when everyone else is going, hey, have you thought of this clarity course? You just launched it. Let's give this a minute here. And me feeling like, nah, but I think it could work. It could be square peg into a round hole. Maybe somehow we can make it work. But ultimately, I think there's more opportunity and potential traction over here. And just feeling like, no, we can pivot that direction. And so I'm ultimately glad we did.
It's worked out extremely well. You're on the show right now. So where does that come in though, where you don't do it again, right? So you must have gotten enough traction that you weren't like, oh, now I have a different hit. Cause I see other people that go, oh, I switched once, but then they launch something else and then they switch again and they can never really build the momentum because they're switching too often.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly true. I mean, you and I both have entrepreneur friends where, every year, you're doing what now? Like, what are you teaching? And like, I thought you were just doing this other thing. And like, why? So I think there's a lot to be said for just longevity and staying power of you want to make sure that you are positioned as the blank person. I need some help with speaking. Oh, you got to go talk to Grant because he's been doing that his entire life versus like, here's someone who does, Pinterest marketing one day and then they teach, Facebook ads another day. And then they're teaching Facebook groups one day. And then you're just like, what? So I really do think that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot to be said for once you kind of find that thing of just doubling down. I'll give you an example on this. So, the company that we run is called the Speaker Lab. And so you mentioned that we had just recently launched this book. And so I had a lot of people who, we've had several people who've come to us and said, hey, as speakers, a lot of us are also interested in publishing a book. And there are like naturally a lot of ancillary opportunities that exist. People who are interested in speaking are also interested in writing and doing a podcast and doing YouTube and doing a course and doing coaching and consulting and all these different things. So we could say, okay, it's justifiable that our audience is interested in all these other things. And so why don't we teach all these other things? And so there's a guy who sent me an email and said, hey, you have the Speaker Lab. You should create the Author Lab. And on one hand, you're like, okay, that's kind of interesting. On the other hand, you're like, but for every other thing we do, like it waters down the core thing that we do. And so one thing that we tell speakers all the time who are, as they're trying to process and think these same questions through, like, who do I speak to? What's the problem that I'm solving for them? I'm not trying to do all things for all people. As we said, that you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet, the steakhouse and not the buffet, meaning that like if we were looking for a good steak, like we could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 things that they offer and they're all mediocre, or you could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really, really well. So they don't do lasagna, they don't do pizza, they don't do tacos, they don't do cupcakes, they do steak, and that's it. And so by doing that, it's counterintuitive, but it makes it simpler to attract the right type of clientele and to repel the wrong type of clientele. Like if you're a vegetarian, you're probably not going to a steakhouse. And that's okay. But the chef at a steakhouse had to make a decision at one point to say, we are going to be a steakhouse. And by doing that, we're not going to do all these other things. They may be deeply passionate about, I love making tacos. I love making cupcakes. I love doing all these other things. But saying, no, we are focused on this. And by doing that, it's again, counterintuitive, but by focusing, by being more narrow, more clear, more focused, actually makes it simpler to attract the right type of client and to build the business versus like, we do all these things, or this big, broad, vague thing where we feel like we're casting the net as far and wide as possible, which again, just doesn't work. So for us, there's a lot of people interested in the speaking industry, but we focus primarily on the business of speaking. How do you actually find and book gigs? So, we do a little bit, for example, on, how do you create and deliver a great talk? But it's not the core of what we do, but we're happy to recommend like, oh, you should talk to such and such or such and such. Like they're great at that. Whether you're looking for some type of group coaching or course or one-on-one coach, here's some people that we would recommend, but here's our lane. And we're really, really good at this thing. We're a really good steakhouse. But if you're looking for tacos, that's great. I'm happy to recommend a taco shop down the street, but here's what we do.
Yeah, it makes it way easier to recommend you. I know anyone that needs to speak, I'm like, I know you and Hugh Culver, and I just send everybody over to you guys. And now Hugh's doing something different too, so now it's you, right? So when we start,
but he's also really doubled down on that thing. Like it was something. What he was doing was he was kind of just he had this little side project, and he, to his credit, is going, no, I'm going all in on this, and he's really focused on this. And again, like filling one specific need. Like the core thing that he does now is he takes content, creates blog posts for a lot for speakers, right? So it's just like, I'll give you one other example of this. So let's imagine, God forbid, that one of us had to have brain surgery. All right. So we have a choice. Like we could go to our local family medical doctor. They are a doctor. They went to medical school. They may have done some surgeries before. They know more about the brain than you or I do, but they haven't done brain surgery. Or we could go to the brain surgeon. We're like, day in and day out, this is what they do. So if you have a cough, you don't go to them. If you have a broken arm, you don't go to them. You know, if you got the Rona, you're not going to them. But if you have a brain issue, that's the person that you want to go to, versus the doctor who's like, I could probably figure it out. Like, that's not who you want, you know, like in the same way that the people who come to us, well, there's an opportunity over here and an opportunity over here, and we could do this, and speakers need help with that, and we could do, like, no. We do brain surgery. We are Steakhouse. We do this one thing, and we're good at the one thing. And again, by doing that, it actually makes it simpler to attract the right type of client.
It's so funny. I can tell you said this before. You're so precise with your analogies and with everything too. And even just in that, it allows you to have less energy with the stories and the analogies. And you get to tweak what you're already doing to be really, really of the best, highest excellence humanly possible. And that's how you can create the best course and the best experience for people too. Do you ever get bored talking about it? That's what everybody else goes like, oh, but then I'm just talking about the same thing all the time.
Yeah, I think I don't, in the sense that there's always kind of new angles and new challenges. I'll give you an example. So like at the time of this recording, we're in the thick of COVID land, and which, as you might imagine, isn't real great for the speaking industry, where it's dependent on large groups of people to gather together. And that just, mid-March kind of stopped all of a sudden. It was just a weird thing. And so now all of a sudden, as a company who teaches and trains this, you're going, well, now what do we do?
Exactly.
How do we pivot? How do we adjust?
Yep.
So, we really have leaned into virtual speaking. This is something that has been around for a long time, and some speakers have dabbled in it, but because of the world and what's happening, it's caused this like real need in the marketplace and real opportunity in the marketplace. So we have really leaned into that a lot. And actually, in the thick of all of this, we've had a record revenue month. 2 months ago was our best revenue month that we've ever had in spite of this. And so I think like, even though there's a lot of longevity to the speaking industry, there's always going to be kind of unique challenges and opportunities and obstacles that present themselves as technology changes, as the economy shifts, as the market shifts, that we just have to be aware of and have to pay attention to, of how do we best, serve and support students who are interested in speaking, which is another thing that I like about our particular industry, is it does feel like there's a long track record here. Like professional speaking and being a public speaker is one of those things that has been around for a long time. Like you can go back to the Greeks and there's people standing on stage presenting to a group of people. So it's been around for a long time, and it will be around for a long time. So the speaking industry has survived wars and depressions and recessions and 9/11. And so even though like this is really weird right now, the speaking industry will certainly be fine on the other side of this, versus if you were teaching Pinterest marketing, again, no knock on that, but like, I don't, is Pinterest going to be around in 5 years? I don't know, And so I like the idea of, okay, let's plant our flag in something that has like a long track record and should continue to be around for a long time.
I remember I emailed you and it was like, so how are you doing during this crazy pandemic? Because of that, right? Everything was shifting, but especially your industry. So I want to go into that because there's people that are speakers that are listening right now going, oh crap, I thought you couldn't charge for virtual speaking gigs. And I know you have thoughts to say about this. So what does somebody who was planning on doing potentially quite a few speaking events this year, what do they do? How do they shift? Give us some advice.
Yeah, a couple of big picture things. So one is that, again, like I said, the speaking industry has been around for a while. It will be around for a long time after this. So the long-term perspective is I'm not real worried about it. Now, what we're trying to figure out is the short term. What do I need to do today? One of the things that we have seen is that events are still booking speakers. And so even though, there may not be an event happening today at this moment, most of the time when events are booking speakers in the first place, they're booking anywhere from 3 to 6 months out. Sometimes, closer in, sometimes further out. And so if there's an event that's happening 6 months from now, some of those events are going, we may happen, we may not happen, we may have to go virtual, we don't know. But at this moment, we are planning on having an event, and therefore we can't wait till the week before to book a speaker. So just in our own experience and just kind of talking with other speakers and kind of keeping our ear to the ground, it seems like there are still new events that are being booked, more than just reschedules and postponements and that sort of thing, but new events that are still some that are being booked, some and more so in some industries versus others. We've also noticed that a lot of workshops continue to be popular, meaning that big conferences with 1,000 people and doing a keynote type thing, that may take a second to come back, but doing like maybe a corporate training or some type of small group workshop with 25 people, you can do some safe social distancing there. You can have a bit of more of a controlled environment. It's a little bit simpler to coordinate and put together versus a large scale event. So that's a couple things that we're seeing with like live in-person events. As far as virtual, there are certainly a lot more virtual opportunities that are happening now. Virtual has always kind of been one of those things that not a lot of speakers or event planners have taken super seriously. Like, sounds nice, but it's not the same. And you're right, it's not the same. But right now, for so many businesses and companies and organizations and conferences, it's the only option. And so there's more and more groups that are leaning into it, which is creating more and more opportunities for speakers, as speakers are kind of scrambling to figure out, what do I need to do and how does this work and how does the technology work? And so the thing that we keep beating the drum and telling speakers is, as speakers, as entrepreneurs in general, like, we are in the problem solving business. And just because live events aren't happening doesn't mean that all of a sudden their problem has magically been solved. So let's imagine that you're speaking in the corporate space on sales training, right? Well, just because there's a live event that was supposed to happen where you were speaking at, and now all of a sudden it's not happening, doesn't mean, okay, all of our sales issues have been resolved. We figured it out because we're not having the event. Like, that's not the case. Like, they still have a challenge, and you have to still figure out how to best solve that. So one of the things we've been kind of talking about is thinking through kind of the different mechanisms of how you can go about solving that. So it's kind of like you look at the restaurants right now in the restaurant industry, that for most restaurants, their model has been, you come to us, you sit down, tell us what you want, we'll bring you the food. And now all of a sudden that can't happen, but we still need food. And so people are switching to delivery or switching to dine-in or a carry out, or some of these other type of examples of where the food, the deliverable is the same, but the mechanism may look slightly different. And so for us, the problem that speakers help solve for their audiences, that still exists. Like, that problem still is there that speakers can help with, but the mechanism has to look different if we can't all gather in the same place. So how can you present virtually? What does that look like? Are there coaching or consulting opportunities that you should be thinking about or considering or leaning into? What do some of the like smaller live in person? You're used to doing these large scale keynotes, but what does a small in person workshop look like? And so just talking through like what do some of the variables or some of the variations look like? And so I think one of the biggest thing for any speaker to do right now is to not stick their head in the sand and be like, all right, I'm just going to ride it out and see what's going to happen. Because the truth of the matter is we're a few months into this, and we as humans, we are good at dealing with crisis when we know where the beginning point is and where the end point is. And right now we are dealing with a crisis where we know where the beginning point was, but we don't really know how this is going to play out or how long this is going to be. So it's not healthy as for any business owner or entrepreneur to be like, all right, I'll just wait. Like, that's just a bad plan. Versus saying, no, like we got to pivot. We got to pay attention. It doesn't mean we have to do this forever. So one thing we've been telling speakers is that your pivot doesn't have to be permanent. Your pivot doesn't have to be permanent, meaning that, are we going to teach virtual speaking forever? Maybe, maybe not. But while there's this real need and opportunity in the marketplace, we're really leaning into it. But it doesn't mean we have to do this forever. So leaning into something or pivoting accordingly to what the market would ask right now is important, but also realize like you're not making a permanent decision here.
What I really liked that you were saying before about the problem still being there, are there really cool ways? Have you seen any cool ways of doing speaking in a better way than just webinar, PowerPoint, blah, right? Is there anything that makes it better? Are there better platforms, or is it just better ways to chat? I just feel like even in the webinar space beforehand, it was just getting kind of like, oh, and now we have 100 webinars that all say kind of similar things and have the same formats. And right. Is there any cutting edge stuff you can tell me about?
Yeah, there are certainly some speakers who have done a really good job upping the production value. And so a couple speakers who come to mind who they have really said, okay, I'm going to go all in on this. I don't want to just be like a talking head to a camera, because it's not the same environment, right? Because you, on the other side, you are competing for people who maybe, have other browser tabs up or have TV on in the background or fiddling on their phone. And it's hard to keep their attention in a virtual environment, let alone in a physical in-person environment. And so, so one thing that they've really done is really just up the production value. So it's almost like if you're watching like a live news, your evening news or something, like there's a high production value to that, multiple cameras, and it's more than just a talking head. And so we have seen that. We've also seen that the higher the production value from the kind of the setup for a speaker, the higher fees that they're able to charge, because the events realize, okay, they're taking this seriously. I got to take this seriously. Because if you are just kind of as far as speaking fees right now, it is a bit of a wild, wild west where people are kind of figuring out like, what are the going rates for this? This is something that, the whole industry is trying to figure out. And so if you are just kind of a standard talking head, it's really hard to charge what you had been charging to stand on stage and deliver a presentation to an audience. But if you have the production value that really backs it up, that, hey, I can demonstrate to you that this is much more, that this is really an experience more than just kind of me, sitting in my house and at a mediocre setup with a poor quality camera or lighting and giving my talk, like that doesn't work. And so really thinking through the production value has really gone a long way.
What are you seeing as far as speaking fees then too? Because somebody who before pre-pandemic could have done $5,000 to $10,000, and then they're like, oh, I'm a talking head and have really crappy equipment. Like, what are they actually getting paid for doing some of the similar but virtual events?
Yeah, we've certainly seen it all over the map. So we have seen some speakers who, like on the high end of the production value, are charging what they would get if they were doing a live in-person thing. But and that's not common, but we have seen that and seen, several. I've talked to one-on-one conversations with several speakers who've been getting, like 5 figures on speaking. Now, most speakers are charging anywhere from 30 to 50% of what their normal speaking fee would be. Now, the upside with virtual versus in-person stuff is that you can certainly make it up in volume. So when you are doing live in-person gigs, you can only do like 1, 2, maybe, I've never done a hat trick, but I've done 2 different gigs in the same day in different cities, and that can be done. Occasionally a speaker can pull off 3, but there's just a limitation to it. And, there's times where I might do a gig and be invited to do a different gig, a different day in a different city. And logistically, I cannot make it work. I cannot get from point A to point B with the parameters there. But whenever it comes to virtual, I've talked with some speakers who are like, I'm doing 10 virtual gigs a week. And even though I may be charging less, I'm home the whole time. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to do anything. I don't even have to wear pants, and I'm able to do these presentations. So there's a lot more, versatility and options with virtual. So it is something that, even though it's different, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It certainly creates a lot of new opportunities for speakers to consider or lean into.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why you wanted to go more online, is to be with your family. So yay, at least they get to be with their family a lot more.
Well, and this is a good example of, as I was working with you and making that transition from being a full-time speaker to now I do a handful of gigs, but not nearly as much as I used to. Like if I was a full-time speaker right now, it would be really, really tough. And I've had a lot of those conversations with speakers who, speaking is 100% of my livelihood, and now it's just gone. Like they're not happening. I'm not sure when they're coming back. This is a really, really scary, difficult spot to be in. Now, so I am thankful to have been intentional to build something that's not dependent, solely and strictly on me. But there are, obviously right now every possible industry is affected.
What do you say for the mindset side there too? Because like as somebody that deals with speakers all the time, that just had their entire money taken away from them, and then they go, and we have no end point. I'm sure there's a lot of fear and anxiety and all sorts of stuff. What are you telling people to try and help them with some of that stuff so that they don't bury their head in the sand?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is to realize like we're in this. So this isn't, I think for a minute there, we were all kind of like, this will blow over in a week or 2. But I think at this point, we've all recognized like we're in this. So you can't stick your head in the sand. If your head's been in the sand, you got to pull it out and realize I got to pivot and do something different. And so it kind of depends on, a bunch of different factors of what you would be doing now. So there's some speakers I know who maybe they were the breadwinner for their family, and they're going, I don't have any gigs. And so what do I need to do? And so some of them have, picked up some part-time jobs, or some of them are, I know of a handful that are like, I'm pausing my speaking business until things resume and pick back up, and I'm getting a full-time job elsewhere. Because at the end of the day, like you do have to like provide for your family. Like we all like to eat and live indoors. You got to do something. Again, you can only go so long of like, I'm waiting. Holy crap, we're in a much worse financial position now because I was waiting. So you got to do something. So there's no shame in at this moment, really doing whatever you need to do just to make ends meet. The other thing I would say is that if you're not interested in leaning into the virtual form, then again, going back to what we were talking about, where again, if you're a restaurant and you're saying, well, we don't want to do delivery. Okay, well, then you have to transition to do carry out, or you have to transition to do something, or you're going to be out of business if you want to stay in that business. So for example, there's we live in the Nashville area, and there's a taco place 10-15 minutes from here, and we love going there. But for several months, like, they were closed. And so, once or twice a week, we'd go in and we'd pick up tacos, and they had to switch the whole thing to go. And so I was talking with the owner and a couple of the managers a few times, and they're like, we just weren't set up to be a to-go place. Like, we did a little bit of to-go stuff like most restaurants, but now all of a sudden, like, all we do is to-go, and all we do is, Postmates and Uber Eats and that sort of thing. And so we've had to shift the business model and the operations of how we operate. And so, like, the same thing is true for speakers. Is like that restaurant, that taco place, realized it's not always going to be like this, but for a season, if we're going to make ends meet and we're going to keep the ship afloat, we got to pivot. We got to do some things differently. And so they are making those pivots, and it's the same responsibility for speakers of saying, okay, if live events aren't happening, then how else can I serve and support clients that have the problem that I can solve? And again, that can come in the form of virtual speaking or coaching or consulting or working on a book or doing a course or any number of things. But, just sitting back and saying, I'm just going to wait for live events to come back. They'll be back, but you're going to be waiting a while. Unless you've got pretty deep pockets, then that may not work.
Well, and what you did was start a podcast and start building an audience online and starting doing the webinars, but owning your own trajectory, right? Instead of being a speaker and having other people do it too. Are you suggesting that for people? And tell me a little bit about how you started, because you said we started getting traction when we first started, but I know it's been quite a few years. What are some of those pivotal moments of your journey of being an online thought leader?
Yeah. So early on, when we first started doing the webinar, like the first live webinar or two that we did, one of the things that I think was really helpful was kind of looking for some different models and examples of people who had similar business models. And this is something that's been really helpful for me personally just over the years, is look for people who are doing something similar to what you're doing and are a step or two ahead, not light years away. So if I said, okay, I want to be a speaker, let's see, Tony Robbins, he's a speaker. What's Tony up to these days? Like, that doesn't work. But I'm looking for people who, again, are a step or two ahead, and it helps me kind of like, okay, this is what that would look like. And so, for example, when I saw, you mentioned like John Lee Dumas. And so John was doing a lot of webinars and doing a lot of live webinars for a course. And so I was kind of like, okay, it's a different course, different industry, but I see how that would work in our space, right? And then I would see, okay, Rick Mulready is doing a lot with Facebook ads. And so I don't know Facebook ads, but I could probably find someone who does know Facebook ads, and Facebook ads to webinars. Okay, let's try that, and let's lean into that. And so it was a lot of like kind of saying, okay, that's what that person's doing. Here's how that is working. Here's how that would apply to us. Okay, they're doing this podcast, and that podcast is leading to this. Okay, how would that apply to our podcast? And just kind of like paying attention to a bit of like what's working in the marketplace and figuring out how you can apply those things to your own world. And so for me, it was never like, okay, I'm doing a lot of speaking gigs and I'm tired of speaking. I don't want to be a speaker anymore. How do we get out of this? Like, I really enjoy speaking, but I also wanted to be intentional to build something that wasn't dependent on me. And so as we were doing more webinars and as we were figuring more stuff out on like course sales and that sort of thing, then as each month that side of the business revenue, like the teaching and coaching and training side, would grow, then I was just decreasing the number of speaking gigs that I was doing. So it was never like a, on a Friday, like, all right, I'm done being a speaker. And on Monday, like, all right, this course thing's pretty easy. Like, it wasn't like that. I mean, literally over the course of a couple of years of decreasing speaking, increasing the online stuff, to the point now where, again, I'll do a couple of speaking gigs, but it's a fraction of the percentage of our revenue, because I wanted to build something that was not dependent on me. So, so I'm like really, really grateful and thankful for where we are today. But I also like want to be clear, like, it's not an accident. Like, we've been really, really intentional along the way, and decisions that we're making and who we're hiring and what people are doing, to make sure that I'm not building a job for myself, but building a business that's not just dependent on Grant.
Definitely. And I know we talked about SOPs and systems. We're not going to go into that right now, but I do want to dive in, because I feel like your commitment to the course, because I feel like in this internet marketing world, everyone's like, get a course, make $100,000 and your first launch. Sure. Yay, go team, right? And it's harder than that, people. Like it takes a lot of work and a lot of tweaking and can you tell me about sort of the years and how you've grown as far as the course sales? Because you really went all in, and I'm sure you've tweaked the funnel and the Facebook strategy and the things many, many times over the years.
Yeah. So I'd say another thing that's kind of similar to one thing we touched on was finding something that works and just sticking with that for the most part, meaning that that very first course that we offered, we still offer today, and it's a decent percentage of our revenue. And so, you see a bunch of people who they offer a course, and 3 months later they offer a different course, and 3 months later they offer a different course. And maybe it's kind of all under the same umbrella, but it's just like it's hard to keep up with, So for the longest time, even to this point, prior to all like the virtual speaking stuff, we really offered 2 programs, and that was it. And that's all we've done for years, and not trying to do, all these different things. Oh, what if we do this? And what that means is there's a lot of ways that we leave money on the table, and a lot of opportunities that we're passing up. Like we've never done live events, which would be a natural fit for speakers. We've never really done one-on-one coaching stuff. We've never really done mastermind stuff. And that's all good stuff. And that's stuff that you could certainly use to make a living and to generate revenue in a business. But by saying, no, this works. We're going to focus on this. We're going to make this really, really good. We've improved the product numerous times since then. And how do we continue to improve that product versus, again, just trying to, all right, new course. Another thing I would say would be just in terms of like the business model is we've been really intentional with how we've gone about doing this. So I know like when we first started working with you, we saw a lot of people who are doing, and still to this day, like a lot of people whose business is built on like these big launches, like everything kind of leads up to once or twice a year, these big launches. And we did 1 or 2, but man, are they stressful. Like you're putting a lot of eggs in that basket. Yes. And you're just like, okay, I need this to go well in order for me to survive the next 6 months. And I was just like, no, I like to sleep at night. Like that's not fun. And so I really had the approach of, I would rather make a little bit every day than make a whole bunch of money, a couple of times a year. And so that was kind of the approach of doing these live webinars and automated webinars and just doing these daily. I'd rather have, 1 or 2 or 3, 4 sales a day that are just small than to have, 100 in one day, but only have that happen once a year. Like that's just, boy, that is rough. So just again, being really, really intentional on those things and saying, here's something that's working. How do we improve it? How do we tweak it? How do we modify it? How do we make it better? Rather than, okay, we created this course. Now let's go over here. We created this thing. Now let's go over here. And like all of a sudden you have all these plates spinning, but you're so scattered in what you're doing. So for the longest time, everything that we let's fast forward to today. Everything we do points to 1 of 2 places: either book a call to talk to our team about kind of a high ticket program or to attend a webinar. And that's pretty much it. Like everything we do, book a call or attend a webinar. So and we have some different lead magnets and some different ads and but everything points to 1 of those 2 things. And that's it. Like that's the whole business. And really those 2 things, the high ticket program and kind of the DIY program, are largely like the same or similar curriculum. They teach similar things, teach people how to find and book gigs, but the high ticket version has a lot more group coaching and one-on-one stuff and done for you and hand holding than the DIY version, right? But still, like what they do is they teach largely the same thing versus like, oh, we do this and we do this and we do this and we do this. No, we're still a steakhouse. You can get a filet or you can get a T-bone. And that's pretty much it. That's what we do, right? Versus like, here's 20 different versions of steak. So that's for the longest time, like that's really been our business model. It's just like, let's be really, really good at this one thing. And we may offer it a way or 2, but instead of trying to do all these different things, we do this.
I really appreciate that too. Cause like you can also level up each piece within that instead of having 20 different funnels where you're only giving little pieces of time to each one. Like your copywriting, I thought the email I got the other day was so solid, and it was about booking a call, and I was like, oh, that's not him. Okay, thanks, Grant. I thought you wanted to hang out with me, but to be able to tweak the copy. Do you do the copy? Do you have an in-house sales team? Tell me a little bit about the team. I know we have to wrap up in a sec though.
Yeah, so we've got at this point we have 16 people on the team, which is a mix of full-time employees. It's a mix of regular contractors. I'd say it's equivalent of probably 8 to 10 full-time people. And everybody wears a different hat. One of the best things that we have done in the business is about, so last fall 2019, we I did a 1-month sabbatical. And I think you and I maybe talked a little bit offline on this.
Yeah.
And so some of this came from Mike Michalowicz, and he was the one that had kind of suggested it. And so I'd been intrigued by the idea. I'd seen some other people do it. I was like, okay, I want to give this a shot. And less from the sense of like, I didn't like going into it. I didn't really feel like I needed like a long vacation. I knew I was going to get kind of bored and stir crazy. But what I really wanted to do was do a stress test on the business and say, okay, if we take Grant out of the business, then how do things run? Like if you just force people to make decisions and run things without you, what happens, what breaks, what works, what doesn't work. And so we talked about it and kind of prepped for it for a couple of months leading up to it, and did the sabbatical and we came back from it and things went really, really well. And so I remember talking with the team afterwards and kind of debriefing, and they're like, nothing really broke. Like we didn't really need you. And on one hand, you're like, you didn't need me? Okay. On the other hand, like, good. Like that's the point of it. Like that's what we wanted, you know? But the other side of it was, I remember a couple of team members who came to me and said, it meant so much that you trusted us with the keys to the business. And I wasn't checking Slack. I wasn't checking email. I wasn't attending meetings. I was completely offline, and they handled everything. They hired 2 new people while I was gone. So it was fun to come back and be like, hey, who are you? You know? And so just trying to make sure, again, if I'm going to build a business that is truly a business and it's not building a job, that I have to trust and lean into other people and depend on other people that are not me. And so that was a really, really good kind of, again, stress test for the business.
And totally different skill set, right? To be a better leader instead of being like at the beginning. And it's only been 5 or 6 years for you. And that's what's so impressive. I know you've been a business owner for a lot longer than that, of course, but to be able to see the growth and the trajectory of your team, that's amazing. And they probably like working without you sometimes instead of you going, hey, and then there's this thing. Hey, wait, we need this too.
Well,
right?
I kind of have a balance of like, I really, really care about what we do, but also like have just enough where it's like, you are smart people. Like you can make decisions, and it's not that I don't care, but it's like I don't have to make every decision. I don't want to make every decision. And so here's the end result, but how we get from point A to point B, like there's a lot of ways to get there. So what do you want to do? I think we should do this. Okay, let's do that. Like let's give it a shot. And there's times where they do something. There was something I don't even remember what it was, something the other day. And I was like, I probably would have done it differently, but that's fine. Like that's part of it. It's kind of like when you're, you understand like as parents, like you're teaching your kid, like I'd probably do it this way next time, but I gave you the freedom and the autonomy to figure it out and you gave it your best shot. And I got to be cool with that rather than like, why'd you do it wrong in the first? No. Like if I didn't tell them that this is the way I wanted it done, then I can't be upset if they didn't do it that way.
Sounds like you're good at letting go, which is not always a good trait of entrepreneurs. Who knew, right? Like sometimes it's like, wait, I just know. Yes, I really appreciate that. And I love having you on the show. And I know we have to start wrapping up. So what is one action listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of 1 million?
I'd say one thing that we kind of touched on was to find someone who is a step or two ahead of you that is just not only in a similar business to what you want to be, but is doing it in a way that you want to do it. And what I mean by that is you can look at people who may check the box in terms of business and they're like, man, that's what I want to do. But maybe like personally, you're just like, is that the kind of life that I want to have? Like, let's play this out for a second. I'll give you an example. I live, like I said, I live in the Nashville area, which we ought to tell that story of how you indirectly got us here. But so naturally, there's a lot of country musicians and people in the country music industry that are here in the Nashville area. And so a couple of neighbors are in country music, and I've talked with a few of them before where they would say, like being on stage is really, really awesome. But being away from my family or sleeping on a tour bus is just not what people think it is, So on one hand, you're like, okay, if I want to be a musician, I look at them and their career and like, that sounds awesome. But then you kind of get the behind the scenes story and you're like, well, that's not what I want to sign up for, So look for something to like, let's play this out. If you're successful in that thing, does it check the boxes of what it is that you want to do? Is it, fulfilling for you? So for me, like, as you all know, Jamie, like one thing I'm passionate about is I love entrepreneurship. I love business. I love speaking, but it's really, really important to me to be a good husband and to be a good father. And so I tell, our speakers, I tell our team, I tell entrepreneurs all the time, like who you are is more important than what you do. Who you are is more important than what you do. Meaning, if you and I are great podcasters and great entrepreneurs, but like if we suck as a wife or as a husband or as a mom or as a dad or as like this shell of a human being, we're doing something wrong. And so the reason that you and I enjoy what we do is because like we like making a dent and like making a difference in the world. We also like having the freedom and flexibility to spend a lot of time with our families and our friends. And so make sure that you're building towards the kind of life that you want to have, rather than getting there and be like, crap, I climbed this ladder, but I'm leaning against the wrong wall, and now I'm somewhere where I don't want to be.
That's preaching to the choir. Yes. And the people that are in that spot right now, please listen. And it can be done in 5-6 years, like Grant has done, as long as you persevere and stick with the things that you need to do. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Where do we find out more about you? Where do we get your podcasts and all that?
Yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. And the new book is called The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, Building Your Platform. And then we have a podcast by the same name, the Speaker Lab Podcast. We have, at the time of this recording, about 300 podcast episodes on all things speaking and virtual speaking and being a speaker and dealing with COVID and all of that. So yeah, anything and everything we can do to help serve and support speakers, we're here for.
Go check that out. And everybody, thank you so much, Grant, for coming on the show today. I so appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamie.
If you enjoy this show, I would really appreciate your wonderful words of feedback. Go leave me a review. I would love a rating, whatever you can do in the time that you've got. I would so appreciate it.